Welcome back to the Bellwether No podcast. We have a special guest today, Danny Fitzpatrick. He's very near and dear to my heart. When I was a young kid, he was my youth director. So I've known this man for a long time. He's got an incredible story that he's going to share with us today. Widener, do you got anything before we introduce him and let him get going?
No, I mean, I think that the story is going to be everything sad. I mean, I'm just curious to see what you have to say about things, and I'm not going to give away too much, but
yes, sir.
Hopefully, you're comfortable with this, and you just need to realize what you're doing is that's a starting point for a lot of people. And thank you again for sharing your story, and I just can't wait to hear.
One last thing before we get them started. Like and share and go get on the YouTube and subscribe, do all that stuff. All right, Danny, you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Danny Fitzpatrick, and I live here in Odessa, Texas. I have two children. I have a 22-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old daughter, a beautiful wife of just about 15 years. We're going to be celebrating this summer, 15 years together. I was married for 13 and a half years to my first wife, and I'll be telling you that story here in a few moments. I was a pastor for about 27 years. I'm not currently serving a church, but still very active in church, and you'll hear a lot about my faith as I tell my story. I love to cook. I love to hunt. In fact, Gary and I are hunting buddies, and have shared a lease a couple of times now, and good friends. And just I appreciate you calling me. I know it was kind of a last minute deal, but I appreciate you including me and allowing me to be a part of this.
I appreciate you, Danny. And like I said, I know it's a rough subject and tender subject, and I know it's last minute, but I do appreciate everything that you're doing for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we still there?
All right, man. You want to get started with your story and just kind of get it going?
I lost you for a second, Gary. Repeat that.
You about ready to get started, or? All right.
Okay. Just to talk a little about, Gary shared with you that I was his youth pastor. When I was serving at the church where his parents were very active in helping in the youth group. And I was dating a young lady that I had met as a college student. Her name was Janice. And Janice was my dream girl. She was beautiful, blonde hair, blue eyes, gorgeous, wonderful young lady. Met her, fell in love with her the moment I met her. Couldn't get enough of her. 2 months from the day I learned her name, I asked her to marry me. And she said yes, even though she had a date with another guy that night. which she did cancel. Yeah, she did cancel the date, so don't worry about that. Anyway,
well, I'd hope so.
Yeah, we were engaged about 14 months and had just a storybook wedding. It was beautiful, and we had the two kids together, and just an amazing life. She followed me in the ministry as I moved from church to church. Most of you guys know that most youth pastors in the state of Texas only stay about 18 months, and so we moved around quite a bit during that time period, and served all over Texas. And we were living in Vickys, Texas, and I was serving at First Baptist Church there, and we were pregnant with our second child, and Janice calls me. I'm actually at youth camp, and Janice calls me because the baby's not due for 4 weeks, and says, hey, the baby's on the way, and I'm like now, so. How stupid you are when your brain just isn't quite catching up with what's really going on. I drive to town, and because this is before the time of cell phones, okay? Cell phones were here, but they were like giant, and it took like a wheelbarrow to carry one.
Yes.
So, you know, so I drove to town until I got cell signal. I finally called her up, and she told me the rest of the story. And she said, "Run home to Pecos." She was at the hospital here in Odessa, and she says, "Run home to Pecos, grab us some clothes." She said, "I don't have anything with me because when I left the house this morning, I wasn't planning on this happening." So I drove to Pecos, grabbed our clothes, drove to Odessa. I walk into the hospital room, and the doctor is explaining, your contractions are too far apart. We're going to go ahead and send you home. And he sent us home for the night and told us he was going to induce the next morning. And so we went home, and not all the way home to Pecos, but we went to my mother's house and stayed. Then after a good night's sleep, we got up the next morning, went to the hospital, had the baby. There was a couple of little slight things that weren't exactly right, but nothing on the level that I'm about to describe to you. We stayed at the hospital a couple of extra days because of a couple of little minor things, and we went home for a night to my mother's house one more time. Thinking that we would wait and go home the next day because it was kind of late in the day. And Pecos isn't that far; it was only like 80 miles, but
Right.
she didn't really feel like riding in the car that long. She started complaining of a headache that night, and and that wasn't unusual. She had been having some respiratory issues, and that kind of caused her to have low oxygen level, and so we decided to go see the doctor that was taking care of that the next morning. We got up and went over there. By this time, she was really complaining that this headache was really bad, and he arranged for us to go across the street to the hospital and have some tests run. And we're having the test run and everything. And right in the middle of one of the tests, she passes out. And they were like trying to wait for somebody to bring a wheelchair. And I got all upset because I've never seen this before. She's passed out like that. And I grabbed her and just scooped her up and carried her to the other side of the hospital where the emergency room was, and walked her in. They got her into a room immediately. She woke up just long enough to scream at me about how bad her headache was at this point, and said that, please God, just take me. I mean, she's pleading for God to end her life at this point because it hurts that bad. And the nurse comes in and says, "Well, I'll give you some medication. The doctor's approved something." And he gave her some medication, and she immediately passed out. The doctor had walked out of the room at that point, so I went out and told him. I said, "Man, whatever you gave her, she's out." And he's like, "She's out? She's not supposed to be out, So he comes rushing back into the room and starts checking her, the vitals and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, "You need to get out of here." And he kind of made me leave the room. She never woke up. I never spoke another word to her in this life. They took her up to the ICU area, which I don't know why they brought her there first, but whatever it was, they were prepping her for surgery. A very good doctor here named Dr. Kadir came in, and he's a neurologist here, and he's like, "You need to understand that she's brain dead, and you need to let her go." I mean, this is like the first I've heard somebody's actually telling me what it is. I mean, there was no sit down or take a breath, or it's just she's gone. And another doctor comes in and says, "You know what? Let us do the surgery, and we'll see where she is after that." And I'm like, "Well, you're not saying she's brain dead. The other doctor said she's brain dead." I didn't say that, but I'm thinking it.
Yeah.
But he actually gave us a little bit of hope, so we went ahead and did the surgery. And surgery was about an 8.5-hour surgery. They went in because she had a bleed in her brain. A blood vessel had burst because of postpartum hypertension, which just means she had high blood pressure. It was related to the birth. And literally, like I said, I mean, you can tell by the story, she was here 1 minute, and she was gone the next. And I mean, this is like the happiest moment of our life. We've got a 5-year-old. We've got a brand spanking new baby. I am as crazy in love with her as I was, the day we got married, or more. We endured about an 8-day stay in the hospital. She was basically brain dead the whole time. I mean, I was surrounded by well-meaning, loving people, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about. They're there, but you're so deep in the depression, so deep in the loss, so deep in the grief that I don't remember any of it. I mean, I was so confused, and and I'm sitting here and I'm trying to hold on to my faith. Now, you guys need to understand. I grew up in church. I mean, I started in church when, about 9 months before I was born, and I've pretty much been there ever since. You didn't ask my parents if we were going to church. That was stupid. Of course you're going to church. I'll never forget one Sunday I wasn't feeling well. I was probably 12, 13, something like that. And my folks are in their bedroom getting ready, and I just got out of the shower, and I'm not feeling well. So I walk in and I sit down on the end of the bed where my mother's getting ready there, and I'm talking to her, and I'm like, Mom, I don't feel good. I don't really think I can go to church, and I think I better stay home. And my dad goes, well, have you thrown up? And I said, no, sir. And he goes, well, then let's go to church. And about that time it hit, and I did. And then my dad literally said, and I'm not kidding, he actually said, now don't you feel better? Let's go to church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and Gary knows me well enough to know that that's the family I grew up in. It's also the family you grew up in, brother.
I know. Yeah.
So I grew up like that. I mean, my faith has always been the center of who I am. The first youth group I ever had was the one right before Gary's family and I met. And I was 19. I had kids in my youth group that were 18 that were less than a year younger than me.
Wow.
I mean, so I started like that, attended seminary, the whole 9 yards. That's who I was. And so I'm a guy who is sat in the next room with, Sister so-and-so and her husband's in the hospital room, not next to us, and her husband's about to die. I've been the one that's looked at her and said, hold on to your faith, hold on to Jesus, because that's the one thing that's going to be secure right now is the faith that you have in God. And I've said that to those people, and here I am in the middle of my grief, and I'm struggling with the fact that I don't know if I can hold on. I had never been on that side of it. I had never experienced, when everything when nothing is secure, and and nothing that you planned, nothing that you've looked forward to, when all of that just falls apart, and everything that's your identity falls apart, it's kind of hard to see through the problems, to see where your faith was, where you left it, if that makes any sense. And I was at that point, and I didn't know what to say or how to approach that. I mean, I'm in the room during the surgery. I'm in the room, and there's like 30 something different pastors, literally, that were either senior pastors, music pastors, youth pastors, college pastors. I mean, I had just about every, and they weren't just the Baptists that were there. There were several Methodist friends of mine that I had been active in the Walk to Emmaus at that point, and had people that weren't necessarily Baptist, but they were brothers in our faith, and so they were there with me during that time, and even though I had all of that and had those advantages, having people that were there with me, I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see past it. after about 8 days in the hospital, the doctor had come in a couple of times. I mentioned Dr. Kadir earlier, and he's a very well-known doctor here in Odessa, a very good neurologist doctor here. From the beginning, he was the one that just told the truth, that just said, this is what you have, this is what you're dealing with. And he came in on Thursday and told us that, she's gone, there's very little hope. This is the way he put it. He used the words, very little hope. And my father-in-law picked up on that. Well, if there's very little hope, that means that there's at least some. And my father-in-law didn't want us to sign the papers to go ahead and turn the machines off. And out of respect for him, even though it was my decision because I was the husband, legally it was my decision. When he said no, I respected him and did exactly as he said. That was that night. My brother-in-law and I talked to Dr. Kadir privately and said, listen, when you come in and you talk to us again tonight, if there's no hope, just say no hope. Don't forget about the bedside manner. Just tell the truth.
Now, I'm sure you asked that. Was that because you didn't want your father-in-law to hang on longer than need be, or because you said that when they said little hope, he held on to that? So I'm assuming that's why you said that.
That is very true. He there was no brain activity or anything like that. I mean, she just wasn't there any longer. And I had been at the hospital about 4.5 days straight, except for just long enough to run to my mother-in-law's house and take a shower, and come right back. I mean, I slept there in the chair the whole time. I just didn't leave. But so we had a family meeting that night. Dr. Kadir came in and he said, listen, he goes, I've been trying to sugarcoat this to make it as easy to consume as possible. But, you just need to know that she is literally brain dead, and, the machines are the only thing that's keeping her alive right now. And so we had several of her friends that had come up, and they were in the family meeting with us, even though they weren't actually family. And they stayed with us while the nurses prepared everything, told us that they were going to, what they were going to do and how they were going to unhook the machines. I had to sign the papers for it to have them physically unhook her. And Gary, you're really good friends with my nephew, Robert, and I know the rest of the viewers don't know that, but my nephew and Gary are also hunting buddies as well, and have worked together and been friends for a long time. And he stayed at the hospital with me after I signed the papers. Everybody else in my family had left. And I'm sure that you guys can understand where I was emotionally in my head at this point. If there had been a cliff in West Texas that I could drive off of, I would have found it at this point. Here I am, supposed to be the guy that's supposed to be secure in his faith. Here I'm the guy that's been there for other people and tried to be Jesus in those situations and trying to help folks in that situation. And here I am sitting here thinking, man, there's just nothing worth it for me. There's just nothing. There's no reason for me to do this. Now, my kids have been with relatives this whole time because I've been at the hospital. I've got a baby that's literally only days old, and my oldest, Jordan, is about 5.5. She actually started kindergarten while this was all going on. We lived in Pecos, but I knew I wasn't going back to Pecos even if she got well. We knew we were going to stay closer to family, and so we put her in school in Odessa. We used my mother's address to take care of an address and all to get her into the school system here, and all that's going on. and I'm still up at the hospital, and I'm signing papers to turn her off. And everybody left but Robert. He was the one that was standing in the hallway when I came out from signing the papers, and he jumped in the truck with me. And his excuse was, everybody took off and left me here, and I don't have a ride home. You're going to have to give me a ride home. Now, what was happening for real on the inside is Robert knew where my head was.
Sure.
And he wasn't going to leave me by myself, and so I mean, he went out to the truck with me. We're driving home, and in the middle of the drive home, the nurse calls and says, Mr. Fitzpatrick, we have unhooked all the machines and taken all the tubes out and all that other kind of stuff. And he said, she's still breathing, she's still holding on. And she says, I know that your family is a family of faith, and if you want to, you can come back up and talk to her. And so I called 2 or 3 of Janice's other close friends that had been in the room with us for the whole time, including the lady that's actually my sister-in-law now. I married into her family later, but that's part of the story that I'll tell you in a few minutes. And another one of her friends. And we all went back up to the hospital and went in, and she was breathing. I mean, it's an involuntary, deal. I mean, your body automatically does that. And she's still breathing. And it took about 2.5 days after they took the machines off for her heart to stop. And Janice's friends stayed with me. Both of the 2 that I'm talking about, and my sister-in-law, stayed with me that whole time until her heart rate had gotten so slow. And I finally I looked at Lisa and her friend, and Kim, another one of her friends, and I said, listen, I don't want your last memory of her to be, watching that heart stop, looking at the monitor and watching the heart stop. I said, I don't want to be offensive, but I want y'all to leave while she's still breathing. I don't want you to experience that memory. And I stayed there, and I held her left hand, and my sister-in-law held her right hand until her heart stopped. And we said a prayer, and I walked out. And she was gone, and I've still not been home. My 5.5-year-old daughter at that time, and then my about 6-day-old daughter are sitting at the house, and I drove up, and I went inside, and I sat down, and I attempted to tell my daughter what happened. I mean, how do you explain all of that? And all I could do at that point was tell her, I said, your mommy's been really sick for the last several days. And I told her, I said, God loved her so much that he decided that he wanted her to come home with him and didn't want her to be sick anymore. And she went home to be with Jesus. My daughter had experienced death already. At the Thanksgiving before this, we lost Janice's mother. This is in August after that. Janice has passed now. We scheduled the funeral for a couple of days later, and when I came home from the funeral, my youngest was only 8 days old, and I kind of curled up in a ball and didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't leave the house. for the first time in my life, I stopped going to church. I was kind of angry at God at the time, and it wasn't that God was wrong, is that I was wrong. But that wasn't what I felt at the time. All I could see was, you know, Janice was healthier than I was. I was, 440 pounds at the time, overweight, taking all kinds of medications because of weight issues. She was the one that kept the checkbook. She was the one that knew when the bills were coming in. She was the one that, she was smarter than me. She was better than me. She was a better person than me. And God left me here and he took her. And all I could see was how angry I was at God. And I blamed God. I quit going to church, like I said. My kids went to church because my mom took care of that, and my sister got involved with that. Luckily, I had some insurance money. I quit work and I went home. And for about 6 months, all I did was be mom and dad. I was mom and dad both. I resigned the church that I was working at the time. The church had that in Pecos at that time was struggling financially that I worked for, and they had agreed to pay my salary for 6 months until I either found a church or whatever. Janice died in the middle of that, and when I resigned, the church continued to pay my salary and my benefits and my health insurance, all that kind of stuff, even though I resigned. And they mailed me my checks. This is before they were doing direct deposit, like they do today. They mailed me my check, and I mailed the check back to them when they did it and said, hey, thank you, but I resigned. Well, they went and got a cashier's check in my name and mailed it back to me again. They were dead set that they were going to take care of us, and they kept every single one of their promises to us that they had made, even though we resigned. They were very good to us, and I told you I went home and just sort of rolled up in a ball. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Sure. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. If I did eat, it was the wrong stuff, and I ended up over several months after that gaining a bunch more weight. Gary remembers when I was at 465. He knew me at that time, so I was a big guy.
Big man.
Killing myself with food at that time, but that did happen over time. But when I was stressed, I either didn't eat or I ran to food. I'd not eat during the day and then I'd eat all night or stuff like that. I mean, it was nothing good about it. And I finally got to the point where I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I went to the doctor and I said, listen, I'm only sleeping about 3 or 4 hours a night. I'm just killing myself. Something's got to give. And that's why I believe in some of the medication that they give you when you're in that. And the way my doctor put it, and I kind of appreciated this, he says, you don't have clinical depression like some people do, but he said, you have a very good reason to be depressed, but sure, they're both legitimate. Both of them deserve treatment, deserve help. And people, I want to stress this very much to all of your viewers. Never look down on someone because they're experiencing emotional problems, because it's not always their fault. It could be something that's genetic. It could be something that's chemical on the inside, and it really could be something they experienced. I mean, you guys that serve, in war, you see things that you don't want to see, and they change you.
Yes.
And I've dealt with enough friends. I'm not a professional counselor by any stretch of the imagination, but I am a pastor, and I've counseled with people as a biblical counseling, not emotional counseling or psychological counseling. But I've done enough of that with people that I understand people, and I understand what they face, at least to a point, in layman's terms. And I was scared for people to know that I was taking medication for all of that, because I'm supposed to be the pastor. I'm supposed to be the one that has it all together, and I didn't have it all together. I was hurting. I needed help.
Can I just ask a question? When you said that, you went home and you holed up away from everyone, did you find yourself losing trust in your faith at that time? Like, were you questioning that?
I did, because I kept saying, let me clarify this. I never lost faith that God loved me. I never lost faith that he loved Janice, my wife. I never lost faith that he loved my kids. But what I thought was, time out, God. I thought you had a plan. I thought you had it all together. I thought you were holding it all in your hands. And here I am facing all this stuff, and I can't see the wisdom in what happened. I still don't understand it. I still don't understand why God took her and not me.
Sure.
But at the time, it was not a distrust of his love. It was a distrust of, I thought you were in charge. I thought you were going to fix this, and you didn't. And I had a pastor friend of mine that called me up. He was my pastor when I was growing up. His son was one of my best friends in high school. And he lost a wife in his 30s, buried a wife that had cancer. And he called me up. Well, this is while I'm not going to church. And his name was Dave Atkins, a very well-known pastor here in town. Pastored one of the cowboy churches at this time, at the time period I'm talking about. But he had been my pastor at Second Baptist when I was growing up. He calls me up and he says, Danny, I'm coming to get you. We're going to lunch. And I tried to give him an excuse. And I said, Dave, I can't do that. I really don't, I'm watching the baby. And he's like, I already talked to your mother. Your mother's going to come watch the baby, and I'm coming to get you for lunch. And I mean, so I guess I'm reading between the lines. My mother never told me this, but I guess my mother had probably called him and told him what was going on with me, and knew the respect that I had for the man. And so he comes by and gets me, and he takes me out to lunch. And he's like, just because God doesn't answer yes every single time doesn't mean that God isn't answering. When you really stop and you think about it, God has three basic answers. He has yes and no. Those are the obvious ones. Sometimes he's going to say yes. Sometimes he's going to say no. And sometimes he's going to say not now. He's going to say it. And that to me are the three answers that he has available. And sometimes we don't understand when he just doesn't say yes every time. But
Right.
God knows everything, even the stuff that we don't know. Dave looked at me and he said, what do you think God was saving her from? If God took her home, if God got to the point where, he's walking with her and he says, you know what, we're closer to my house than we are to yours. That's the way Dave, those were the words that Dave used when he explained it to me. And he said, God took her home to save her from something that might have been worse. And he goes, I don't know what that is, but God sure does. And it kind of made a lot of sense to me. He also said a bunch of other things. And I'll say this. There were a bunch of people that said, you know what, Danny, in time, you'll get over this. And I wanted to choke somebody for saying that. You don't get over that kind of stuff.
I can imagine.
I mean, they meant well.
No.
And Dave was the one that Dave said this. He said, Danny, when they say that, He said, don't hear in time you'll get over it. Hear with God you'll get through it. And that's what made sense. In fact, the title of what we were talking about today is how I found my path through the grief and the loss. And those words that Dave said to me was exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to know, first of all, that those people didn't mean evil. They were trying to be nice. They meant well in what they said. And I'll say this: don't ever say that. Don't ever tell somebody that's experiencing grief, in time you'll get over it. Tell them, with your faith, with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, you'll get through this, because you can get through. But I'm still in love with my wife. I talked to her. I drove to Dallas 2 weeks ago, and I had about a 45-minute conversation with her. She wasn't sitting in the truck with me, obviously, but I had a conversation with her. Telling her what's going on with my kids. And you can call it prayer, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm sitting here thinking, what would she think about these things? And I'm discussing it with her memory. And then I'm saying, God, thank you for everything that you gave me. And so it's a precious thing. That conversation with Brother Dave was instrumental for me, getting me to the point where I started to see this for what it was. This wasn't that God hated me. It wasn't that God hated my children. It wasn't that God didn't have a plan. God was still in charge. And I started back to church. I ended up leading music at one of the local churches here as an interim for a little while. After that, I ended up pastoring a little mission church. And after the mission church, I met Vicky. I've known the girl that I'm married to now. I've known Vicky since we were third graders. She was my first kiss. Her older sister and Janice were practically best friends. And I mentioned that two of Janice's friends stayed in the room with me for like 36 hours straight. After they unplugged her, and Vicky's older sister Lisa was one of the two that did that. She was in the room with me, and she adored Janice, loved Janice. I ended up starting a conversation with Vicky, and then we started dating. I was single for 19 months total. But like I said, I've known Vicky all my life. It was so easy. And I was still grieving. We got married. I was still grieving, but Vicky loved me through it. And we all know how good a spouse, or what a spouse can do and how they can get you through.
So I got a question about that. So you said you're single for 18 months.
Yeah.
If you're still grieving, like, how can you give yourself to like another person, like all your love? You see what I'm saying? Like, that seems like
I do.
That's got to be hard. And that's just my thought. My first thought on that is that's got to be tough.
It was.
It just seems like that she wouldn't be there. Like she would feel like she's not getting the whole you that she should be getting. And for a woman to stay through that's huge in itself.
She is a saint. I'm married to a saint. There's no question. She loved me through it. There's no question that I did her a disservice in marrying her that way. In other words, I would say it this way: we did the right thing. We just did it a little bit early, and
sure.
I put her through because I was still grieving. We'd be watching TV, and it would be one of those doctoring shows, and somebody would have a brain aneurysm, and all of a sudden I couldn't be in the room anymore, because it was exactly the same kind of story. seeing those kinds of things happen over and over was very difficult. But Vicky, how do I say this? When Vicky married me, Vicky had never been married. She was a career girl, had been with the same company 20 something years at the time. Because she had started when we were all in high school, because we all grew up in the same church together. And so I've known her, like I said, since we were third graders. I remember the day I met Vicky. I walked into choir practice, little kitty choir practice, and walked up, and Marcy Shrum, who was my friend that worked, her daddy worked with my mother, said, "This is Vicky." And I remember meeting Vicky that day. Of course, girls had cooties at the time. You remember that.
They still might.
But I remember meeting her. That part of it. I mean, when it came to us loving each other, trusting each other, those kinds of things, that came very easily. But she loved me through stuff I didn't deserve love through.
Sure.
During that time. I mean, I wasn't like cheating on her or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just that
what you're going through.
Yeah, just the sadness and all that kind of stuff, helping me with my children. Even when we were dating, I mean, it was like I'd call her up, and when you're dating, when you're young and you don't have kids, you can date anything, you can go anywhere you want, do anything you want. When you have kids, it's like this. You call her up and you say, "Hey, baby, what are you doing tonight?" "Oh, okay, great. Hey, how about I cook you dinner and you come help me bathe the kids?"
Yeah.
That was about 3/4 of our dates, and but it's just kind of how things worked. And I had a kid that had grown up in our youth group that was very close to my first wife, and she called me up and she says, "When's the next time you and Vicky are going out on a date?" And I said, "Oh, I think we're going this weekend." She said, "I'm going to come watch the kids so y'all can go on a real date." She said, "I've been thinking about a way to honor Janice," and she said, "The way I'm going to do that is take care of you." And she started helping me clean house. She babysat the kids so Vicky and I could go on real dates with, and not have to worry about getting home at a certain time because you got to get the kids down, all that kind of stuff. And she helped us through. And your viewers can be aware of this. When somebody's going through those tough times and then they're trying to heal, some of those kinds of things like that you can do to minister to their needs and help them to move on a little bit, dive in and help. Do those things like they did. And
now I've got a question for you,
yes, sir.
Danny. I don't mean to cut you off. Now you say Vicky didn't have kids before,
right?
Like y'all, she didn't have kids, and then her stepping into this role with you is, you're just. I mean, she's walking in as a ready-made family.
Yes.
With the baby and with the toddler, I mean, like, well, I guess young woman, I guess you want to say. I mean, she's 5-6 years old maybe at the time.
Right.
Now, when Vicky walks into this, knowing everything that happened in the past,
yes,
it seems like it would have been easy for her to throw her hands up and say, "You know what? This isn't my kids. This isn't my, my life.
I don't have to deal with it."
And like, why do I have to help you with these kids? That speaks volumes on Vicky, of the person she is.
Yes.
But my question is, like kind of like Justin said a while ago, like going into this, how can you be all in when you're still grieving? At the beginning, did y'all have issues where she might have set back and let you just kind of vent, and where she kind of shielded the kids away from that?
Yeah.
Or did you, like, you know what I'm saying?
There's a little bit there's two or three things. For one thing, there's a lot of chemistry between the two of us. We've been friends for so long. She had similar values to to Janice, and I mean, they're not. Janice and Vicky are polar opposites when it comes to personality and those kinds of things. So Janice was, everything was pink roses. I mean, she was girly girl and all the
Oh yeah.
time. And Vicky was Vicky's more at home with their cowboy boots on, and if you walk into her house, it's cowboy stuff, and she likes country music and all that kind of stuff. They are
Nothing wrong
not the same kind of person, but they had the same values. They when it came to their faith, they were both very strong in their faith and very active in church and those kinds of things. And so that made it easy. So faith fed into that because I'm back in church at this point. I'd had that conversation with Dave Atkins I told you about, and I'm on the mend with all of that. I'm serving a church at the time. Like I said, I did some interim work, and then I started pastoring a mission church at the time, and things were just kind of going that way. And Vicky never saw it as a burden, or at least if she did, she never said it. She was very supportive the whole time. She was in my corner, and if there was a time that something that was going on. She dived in and helped me with whatever it was. During, we had our first Christmas together after we got married, and my kids are they're Muncies. They have Muncie blood in their veins. So my sister-in-law on Janice's side of the family calls us up and says, hey, can we do Christmas together? And they had been at the wedding, and had met Vicky and knew Vicky's parents, and they already knew Lisa, the older sister I told you about, and so the families
right.
already kind of knew each other. But Christmas rolls around, and she calls us up, and we go over to have Christmas with their family, and Vicky's with me, and it blew Vicky away. She got a gift from the Muncies. Wasn't expecting to have a gift given to her specifically from that family, but they did. And the two families have, we're still in the family with the Muncies. My nieces and nephew call Vicky Aunt Vicky.
Wow, that's nice.
Now with your daughters, I've met them. Wonderful children. I
Yes, sir.
mean, great children. You've done a great job with them. I would like to give some of that respect to Vicky also. I mean, she was there for them the whole time. Now, one question I do have for you,
Yes.
your 16-year-old, that was the one that was born right before Janice passed away.
Yes.
I know you probably sat down with her and had this talk with her, but as a father, like me and Justin, we're both fathers of two girls.
Yes, I know your girls.
Yeah, I don't know how I would have that conversation with my daughters. As much as I try to be transparent with them and, as honest as can be and set them up, for the future as far as let them know, like what they need to know. So when they are on their own, they're okay. But I mean, having that conversation had to tear you up. Yeah. I mean, is that something you did? Like
It's the hardest
if
thing.
it
The
was
hardest thing I've
me,
ever
the
done.
way I would have to do it, load up. I'd have to load them up in the truck. And we'd have to go for a drive, and I'd have to get myself, mentally and prepared for it. But I would have to do it by myself. Now with Vicky being, there, every step of the way. Did she help you with that conversation, or help you know when it
That
was time to have that conversation with her?
I honestly, from day one, her entire family, not just Vicky herself, but her entire family has been involved in communicating to my children who Janice was. Um, they, um, if you go to my sister-in-law Lisa's house right now, and you walk into her living room. Now, this is Vicky's older sister, my wife's older sister. If you go into her living room, on the wall is the day that both of our daughters, because our kids are the same age, that they had baby dedication, and there is a picture of Lisa holding their daughter and Janice holding their daughter on the wall in my sister-in-law's house.
Wow.
That whole
Wow.
family has been involved in helping us to minister to my children and to let her know, the honor that we give to Janice, and Janice's
Because
family, of course, like I said.
in society these days, it would almost be easier to make that child believe that Vicky was, her mother, and
Yeah, the other one
there
was
was
never there.
yeah,
Yeah.
Our kids, the way we keep it separate, because our kids are fully aware of who Janice was. We talk about Janice. Vicky talks about Janice. The family does. We don't hide anything like that.
and that's commendable. That's
We call Janice mommy, and we call Vicky mama, and that's how we kind of keep it separate in the house when we're talking. Um, I don't say your mother Janice. I say mommy says this, or and that
yeah.
kind of stuff.
It's
Um,
commendable. It's commendable that you keep her alive through your kids. And I mean, like I said, you have great kids. Y'all done a great job with them, and
Thank you.
I'm happy about that. I mean, that could have at one point that could have went either way.
Right.
After everything happened, for you to pick yourself up and to have Vicky there by your side to work through all this stuff, man. I mean, hats off to her also. I mean, like we said before, I've known you for a long time, and I knew Janice. I've met Vicky,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
they're those kids are lucky to have both of them in their lives. To be honest,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
I mean, it's like I was telling Justin when I told him that you were going to do the podcast. I said I've known this guy forever. I said I knew the wife that passed away. I said she was an amazing woman, and
Oh goodness.
and she was thinking, so abruptly. There was not much of a
The funeral. I didn't say this. I mean,
there was not much warning to people that
Janice was so well known and so well loved. Um, we had the funeral at a church that sat about 800 people, including the balcony, but about 1,000 showed up, and they ended up having to pipe the service by video into the fellowship hall, and they set the rest of the people down in the fellowship hall because the church was so crowded. She was very well thought of, and it doesn't surprise me that Vicky's family, still loves her as well, because Janice was a part of their life before. Janice and Lisa, my sister-in-law, sang in a group together, and they were the closest of friends. Um, you talked about Vicky and how she reacted to everything, and I mean she deserves a lot of honor for the way
she
that she
does.
walked through everything with me.
And you must be
When
an
I was
amazing
dating,
man, because I guarantee you I couldn't keep a woman through all that. I mean, I can't keep a woman through normal circumstances.
I don't think I'm anything special, but I do think that she is. She is. I have been lucky. I have been lucky in love. I married an amazing person the first time. I spent 13 and a half amazing, wonderful years with her, and and God, I don't. God took her home, and then I married another very, very good person, and way beyond what I deserved. And because I dated other girls. Um, I dated a girl right before I dated Vicky, that she's at the house one night, and She was helping me get the kids down, and she walks into Jordan's room, my oldest daughter, and there's a picture of Janice up on the wall. And she's like, "What's her picture doing up on the wall?" And I'm like, "Well, it's her mother, you know."
That's her mother.
Yeah. And the lady's was like, "Well, you know, do you think you ought to have her pictures up?" And I'm like, "I didn't divorce her. I'm not mad at her. You know, I mean,
No.
I mean,
Danny, you've met my daughters, and
yes,
you know they have an older sister. They have an older sister that, you know, I was very much part of her life when I was married to their mother. And this Christmas, my daughters, their sister took them to go get their pictures made, you know, and, you know, professionally done.
nice.
And the picture they gave me had all three of the girls in it. And they gave one to my parents also. And, you know, my daughters were like, "Dad, we weren't sure if it would be okay if we gave you one with Nikki in it too." I'm not mad at Nikki. You know, I still, you know, Nikki will always have a special place in my heart, you know?
Right.
I mean, just because me and their mom didn't work out doesn't mean that I'm mad at Nikki, you know?
Right.
I mean, and so, yeah, that picture's in my living room right now. And I mean, just because, uh, you know, their mom didn't work out doesn't mean that I'm mad at the child,
No,
you know? So I kind of
children
see
are
where you're
innocent.
going with that deal, you know, and you know, but that would have made me mad. Yeah, children had nothing to do with me and Misty not working out. But no, that I think that would have probably been the last time I saw her too. I mean, just
that one didn't work out. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, my youth pastor, you know, talking about relationships, you know, when you're young, and I remember my youth pastor saying that it always seems like Satan sends his best before God sends his best. And it does seem like, and I made 2 or 3 mistakes, and honestly, I was scared to be alone and made a whole lot of mistakes. If I could say anything to anyone that's facing something like what I've described to you, you know, when you're on the back end of this and you're looking to remarry and you're dating and that kind of stuff, don't be scared of being alone. Take your time, consider your options. Don't dive into anything. Don't make rash decisions because you're lonely.
yeah.
And I mean, and you can apply that to relationships. You can apply that to financial. You know, don't go buy something to make yourself feel better. You can apply that to suicide. I mean, don't go make a rash decision when everything's messed up. Wait till your head clears and decide what's best then, and you won't make those mistakes.
I have a couple questions.
So Widener,
what's that?
Go ahead, Widener.
So I keep,
go ahead, Widener.
This whole time that you've been talking, I've been, you know, listening, and there's something that always I keep circling back to in my mind. And that is when you lost your wife, your little one was 8 days old.
Yes, the day of the funeral, she was 8 days old.
So I can't even keep my youngest, for 2 hours without, you know, looking for mama. Like, how did you get through that? That has to be a challenge in itself. Like, how did you get through that? That, I think, like, that just adds to it, because we know newborns, all they do is cry, you know, like, so that's
cry, eat, and poop.
Yeah. So how did you get through that? What was the main driving factor for that?
Desperation. They were the one thing that gave me hope at that time. You know, because I told you at the time I wasn't grabbing a hold of my faith like I should have. I was grasping at the only thing that gave me hope, and that's the fact that my kids needed me. And so it actually ministered to me. And when my first child was born, you know, there was a whole bunch of things. I could not change dirty diapers. I mean, I would get sick to my stomach. Couldn't do it. I mean, I went like a year without eating guacamole because I love guacamole, but I couldn't touch guacamole for a year. I won't go into that. But
No,
then when God sent her, I never missed a beat. If I needed to change a diaper, I changed a diaper. I also had a lot of family. My mother had moved home. My dad had passed away, and my mom had moved back to Texas and lived here and was helping me. I had a sister that would come over. I told you that Jordan had started school, during all of that. And so those first several months, my sister or my mom would come over and help me get Jordan ready for school. And I would get out and take her to school. My mom would stay there and watch the baby. And then I would come back and I would watch the baby all day long until time to go get Jordan. And usually my mom would go get Jordan and bring her home. And, so, I had the baby during the day by myself, but my family was checking in and helping and doing stuff. And then I told you that the kid that had been in my youth group had started helping me with, watching the kids so I could go on dates, but she also started keeping house for me. And she would come and watch the baby. So I could go look for a job, and I finally went back to work after about 6 months, and tried something completely new. I sold insurance for a little while, sold cars for a little while, sold electricity for a little while. Finally ended up putting my resume out to start serving churches. And right before Vicky and I got married, I took a church in Kermit, Texas, which is about 45 miles from here, and I started at the church about 2 months before the wedding, and then got married and served there for 2.5 years after that.
So I have a few more questions too. I don't want to keep you too long if you have stuff to do or whatever. But
I have nothing going on. I'm all yours.
The reason that I asked you that question is, I have 2 little girls, and I watched both of them, be born, and that was amazing. But the way that kids, they need that motherly instinct right away. And yours didn't have that motherly instinct. So it's like, how did she adapt? Like, how did your 8-year-old adapt? Like, was that a struggle in itself? Because, the kid's yearning for something that cannot be provided because of the circumstances. So automatically I'm like, I don't know how this is even possible. So that's why I had that question about it.
I definitely would have to give some credit to my mom and my sister for diving in.
Sure.
And I had the honor of being mama. I'm a guy. I'm a guy to the core.
Big man.
You guys know that, but I've curled hair. I have. I've painted fingernails. I have.
Yep.
I did all that stuff with Bethany. With Jordan. And Bethany didn't get into that till Vicky and I were married, and Vicky had most of that with my younger daughter.
Yeah.
But I did some. On Mother's Day, I got Mother's Day gifts. I was serving at the church. I was serving at the church at that time, and the church gave me a Mother's Day gift because it was right before Vicky and I got married on June 11th, and Mother's Day happens in May, and I had already started at the church, and the church people gave me Mother's Day gifts because I had been mama. They knew my story.
That's awesome.
Oh wow!
My Mother's Day gift's running around upstairs right now. She's going crazy.
So Widener's wife asked a question on here. Can you elaborate on how you reconciled your faith and the circumstance, your faith in your depression, and how was your relationship with God impacted?
Just to describe that, the first step of healing was that conversation with my pastor, Pastor Dave Adkins, that had been my pastor so many years ago. and he understood my circumstance because Janice died in my 30s. I was 33 when she died. She was 31. When Dave's first wife Nikki died, he was 34. So the circumstances were the same. They had children. I had my children. Mine were younger than Dave and Nikki's were. Dave remarried and went through the steps with that, and so he had a unique position to be able to come and talk to me,
To talk to it. Yeah.
to talk specifically to my issues, and he like finished my sentences. I would start telling him something, and he would tell me exactly what I was talking about. I mean,
Wow.
it
Because you've
really
been through it.
it's like I felt like God sent him there, and from that point forward, he got me accountable. I started back reading my Bible again. We started doing the same devotional book, and Dave would call me and say, "Hey, did you read today's devotional?" And and it wasn't a big devotion. It was like a 15 to 20 minute thing that we were doing, and I liked doing it in the morning. He liked doing it at night, but we would call once a day and we would talk about it. And so I had some accountability to a brother, and that's one thing I would say in that circumstance is grab onto somebody that's there for you, and be accountable to somebody to take the steps to walk forward. To somebody that's going to walk with you, and somebody that when you mess up, you respect enough that they can look
Sure.
at you and say, "Man, keep up with me, stay with me."
That's an
You know,
awesome way to look at it. That's a
Yeah,
very good way
we
to look at it.
talk about all the time, doing radio checks and stuff like that.
yeah,
And one of the things we've told our viewers in the past, if you don't even have the words for them, just sit with them.
Yeah.
Don't even say nothing. Just the presence alone.
yeah. There's not a whole lot you can say, but you would be amazed at what the simple words, I love you, man. I love you, brother. I love you, sister.
100%.
It's amazing what just saying I love you and I'm here, what that'll
Yep.
do.
Right.
But I got accountable with that, and kind of tied into that. Most of our friends kind of disappeared. The friends that were mine and Janice's, I think people get scared because they don't know what to say,
Sure.
and so I just sort of stopped hanging out with them. I sought out friends from my younger life, reconnected through Facebook with friends that I hadn't talked to in 20 years. At that point, I had a really good friend of mine that at the time I didn't know him at all, and he calls me up one day, and he says, "Listen, I heard your story, and because this is like during that time, this is like right after I had that conversation with Dave Atkins, and this guy Matt calls me up, and he says, "You don't know me from Adam, but he said my pastor knows you, knows your story, told me about you, and he said God just told me you needed a friend. What you doing today? I'm buying you lunch." And I ended up going to lunch with them. And that's another thing I would say. When you hear about somebody that's going through that, just because you're not best friends with them doesn't mean you can't call them up and say, hey, let's eat lunch together. Let's go
Yep.
let's go have coffee. I don't drink beer, but if you're a beer drinker, call them up and they're a beer drinker and say, hey, let's go get a beer. I mean,
Yep.
just build into somebody's life. And, because every man should have someone that's building into your life, and you should have someone that you're building into their life, and passing that on.
And me and Widener have talked about it before. When we started this podcast, we didn't want it to be about us. We wanted it to be
not at
about
all.
our guests.
Yes.
But I mean, I speak for myself, and I'm sure Widener can attest to it.
Mm-hmm.
That the more we get involved in this stuff, the more it actually helps. Helps me, and in my everyday, things that I do. I mean,
Yes.
being on a a platform such as this one where we try to help people makes you want to be a little bit better person every day, because you never know that one person that might need your help, So you try to be a little bit better person every day, and stuff like that. But, there's times, with this that we take, we kind of hold each other accountable for these
Yes.
podcasts. When we say we're going to do one, we try to make sure that we stay, focused, and we're going to
kind of losing part of the
do
conversation there, Gary.
And after another, he's about to go to the mountains. Oh,
it's cleared up.
But what I was saying is we try to keep each other, accountable for these podcasts. And I know it's a weird deal going 2 nights in a row, but he's about to go to the mountains for 6 days, and we kind of took a hiatus over the holidays. So we just wanted to make sure that we had something out there before he left, and that way we're leaving him with 2 good ones before, he comes back, and then we have another one. But, this story, I knew about it. I didn't know all the details that you went into tonight. So that, it was awesome to hear. The year, I want to say, what year was it that Janice passed away? I can't remember.
2003.
2003 was when I was already in the military. About the time that I met Widener, I think 2004, didn't I?
4. Yep, 4.
So I met him like a year after that. So me and him have been friends since, practically since this incident happened. And as long as we've been friends, I mean, the thing about me and him is we could go 6 months without talking to each other. And then when we talk to each other, it's like we just picked up where we left off.
Yep.
Right.
And for a friend like that, it's hard to find.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, even the scripture itself says that a friend sticks closer than a brother, and that's true many times.
Yes.
I got another question that might be a little harder to answer.
Yes, sir.
So, you talk about, you didn't really lose your faith when all this happened. Now, where do you think your mindset would be if you didn't have that faith in the beginning? You know what I mean? Because not everyone has that amount of faith that you do. There's some people that don't believe at all. So where do you think you would be with that? And do you think that was,
I mean, that's hard to answer because, I mean, it was so ingrained in who I was. I mean, I'd even use the word. I mean, I know it's not your DNA, but it's the DNA of who I am.
Sure.
My faith has always been a part of that, but I cannot imagine having faced this without knowing. I mean, what people that don't believe, what do they think happens? I mean, what do they hold on to? I mean, I know everyone has memories, and you value the memories of that person, and you have the love that you shared, with each other, and that's valuable. But I cannot imagine what a person or what a family that doesn't have the advantage of faith would. I mean, because the Bible says itself that we don't grieve like everybody else.
Sure.
We know that when our loved one dies, that we will see them again. We know where they are. We know it's a better place. And Dave said one other thing that I didn't tell you about, and I'll tell it right here. He said, listen, as much as Janice loves you, as much as Janice loved the 2 kids, as much as she cared about your future and wanted to build into your future and all of the things, she would not come back. She would not choose to come back because heaven is that good. And I remember thinking, yeah. I mean, if you're a person of faith and you open up the hymn book at your church, if they still have hymn books, but if you open up that hymn book and you start looking at those hymns talk about heaven and what heaven's like, and I mean how precious our future in heaven is, and and all that kind of stuff. And when you preach sermons at funerals and things like that, those are the things that you hold on to, because heaven is a place where everything is perfect, where there is no death, there is no suffering, there is no. I mean, it's a place of absolute perfection. It's a place where what we value here on earth is used for pavement. Think about that for a minute. Gold is like one of the most valuable things that we have in this life, and yet in heaven they use it for pavement. Streets of gold.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. The stuff that we value here doesn't mean anything in heaven, except the love that we share. Love is the one thing that goes on forever. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 tells us a whole lot about love. And one of the things that you take home when you read that verse is the fact that love is the greatest thing, the greatest gift that God gave us to share with each other. And it's the one thing that goes on forever. And so share that with each other. So I could say that, but it's hard to say what I would hold on to if I didn't have my faith. It's
so ingrained.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's a tough question. It's just, like I said, there's not everybody has that same faith that you do.
Yeah.
So, and in a sense you had something, that you could lean on to, and, and not everyone has that. So I think that in itself is a different fight in general.
It sure is. It really is.
Wow.
Did you ever find yourself like at battle with yourself on decisions you were making, as far as the future for your children and the future for yourself? Did you ever start second guessing yourself a lot because you're like, man, if I do this, I might be, taken away from my kids. If I take this job, I might be taken away from my kids some, but I need this job so I can give my kids more. You know what I'm saying? Like a struggle within. Did you have that going on?
When you're a single parent, and Gary, you know this, you could almost answer this question for me. When you're a single parent, every question you struggle with it from that perspective.
Right.
And I mean, whether it's your work, whether it's the girl that you're going to date. I dated a couple of people that weren't right, that got beat with the crazy stick or something. I don't know, but I dated a girl from Lubbock, and my daughter calls her Grouchy Gut. So she's got her own little name. And I had gotten really serious with her. This was at that point where I was telling you that I was scared to be alone. And I started dating this girl, but she didn't click with my daughter, and her son didn't click with my daughter. And I had been up there for a date. I'd taken Jordan with me, went up to Lubbock, took her out, and we had gotten pretty serious. She had come down and visited here. When she would come to town, I mean, we were still Christian people, so she didn't sleep at my house. She slept at my mother's house, and I had a house. So she would sleep at my mother's, and we'd go out on dates and blah, 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 Well, I had gone to Lubbock to see her, and we had a big knockdown, drag out fight, because I'm still grieving, and I was probably treating her like a piece of trash at the time, even though I didn't mean to. But I was struggling, and and wasn't in my right mind. And I'm driving home, and coming down 385, coming this direction, coming back to Odessa, and I'm in Jordan is sitting in the car seat behind me, and I'm talking back and forth, and I'm like, "What do you think of Penny?" And she's like, "Oh, well, Penny's nice," and blah blah blah, and she's being nice about it. And then I said, and I mean, this is my, at this point, she's probably 6.5 about, and I'm like, what would you say if I said that I was going to break up with Penny? And Jordan immediately changes from being all nice about it and says, "Oh, please, Daddy, break up with her, please. I don't ever want to see her again."
Yes.
And I turned around, drove all the way back to Lubbock, sat down in front of her, and broke up with her face to face instead of giving her a phone call.
Wow.
You know, and,
Yeah, that's
and,
honorable.
and I broke up with her, and but I mean, it's just hysterical that my 6.5-year-old kid is trying her best to be well mannered and nice about it. And then the minute I say, you know, what would you say if I was going to break up with her? She's like, "Oh please, oh please,
Do it.
Do it. Nowadays, kids would be like, you won't.
I mean, I dated her. She was psycho. I dated another girl that was I dated another girl that was nice that I got a little bit serious with, and the lady that cut my hair had been cutting my hair for 20 years. Was also a very good friend with Vicky and her family. And every time I'd go get my hair cut, she'd say, "Have you asked Vicky out?" And just to kind of give you the story, I'll tell you this really fast. Janice died in August. In October, I was leading music at one of the other churches. I got on the medication. I just started leading music at this church, and Kobe and Lisa were coming to town and bringing their kids. That's my sister-in-law, Vicky's older sister. They were coming to town and bringing their kids on Halloween, and the church that we all went to was where I was leading music, and so they came to the Halloween thing out at the church. Well, Vicky came with them because she wasn't going to miss a chance to see her nieces, and because they were all in their little costumes and such, and so Vicky shows up. I hadn't talked to her in probably 4 or 5 years. We sat there for about 2.5 hours and talked, because we were old friends. And I told her, I said, "Man, Janice hadn't been gone 2 months yet, but I said, when I start dating, can I call you?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, and Janice and I had such a healthy relationship. There wasn't the baggage, it wasn't like I was taking a bad relationship into a new relationship. I had a wonderful relationship that was everything God wanted, or at least I feel like it was. And so I didn't have that kind of baggage. I had grief baggage. I didn't have relationship issue baggage, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And so when I talked to her that day, I really planned on talking to her, but I dated about 4 different people, and about 2 of them I was pretty serious with. And neither of them worked out very well, and obviously, and I broke up with this girl named Tanya, and next day I get my hair cut, and so the lady that cuts my hair says that thing every time I go. She tells me, "Are you going to ask Vicky out yet? Y'all had that talk. You need to call Vicky." Well, I called Vicky up and asked her out on our first date, and I went and got her, and we were driving to Midland to go eat, and we're driving down 191, driving down the highway, headed to Midland to go eat at this one place that we wanted to go. And I'm on the drive, and Tanya calls me, and I was stupid enough to answer my cell phone.
Why?
And and I got all shook up. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at Vicky, and I said, I don't really think I'm going to be a very good date tonight. I don't want to mistreat you. I said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I think I'm just going to take you home. And I took her home, and I said, "Can I call you?" And she said, "If you want to." And
up to you.
The next morning, I woke up and came to my senses, and I went down to the Hallmark store, and I found this card that had the picture of a horse, and it's facing away from you, and so the other side of the horse is facing you, and it said, "I took a self-portrait of myself for you."
It's awesome.
And I apologized to her and asked her out. And after about 2 weeks of talking with her, I finally got her to go out with me again, and the rest is history.
Nice.
So,
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Sometimes you gotta swallow that pride. I mean, that's
the
one
love
of
of a good
things.
woman. The love of a good spouse is everything.
Absolutely.
It's everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Widener is blessed with a saint of a wife. Also, I've
I
met
don't know
her.
how she puts up with me.
She's such a sweet lady.
I don't get it.
I don't either.
I
Both of y'all, when we get off this podcast, need to go hug and kiss your saint
Amen.
wives and tell them thank you for putting up with me.
I got one more. I think my final question for you, Danny, would be, with your whole experience in this, with everything, the loss of your wife and what you went through, do you feel like you came out a stronger man?
There's no question. There's no question that
Good.
my faith is stronger. God has used that story in my life over and over. I can literally be at the hospital now with that same old lady I was talking about earlier. I could be in the same room with her, and I can look at them and I can say, listen, I know I'm not you. I've not lived your life. I don't know your experiences, but I do know what grief feels like. And so, and at least in that regard, I know exactly how you're feeling right now.
Sure.
And I can walk through some of those things because that shared experience. We've all faced death in some way, form, or fashion, and and it's always a hard thing to face, whether it's a parent, a child, a spouse, a relative, a friend. But if you don't find a way to use that to help somebody else down the road, then what good was it? You walked through it. Somebody helped you. You helped somebody else.
Yeah, and I think our experiences make us who we are in this day and age.
Yes.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that you gotta go through all that stuff to. I mean, I don't think you have to go through certain things, but the things that people go through makes them the person they are today.
True.
And if you want to make it for the better, I think that's up to you, because it's too easy for people to go through things and then sit there and feel sorry for themselves for the rest of their life too, and blame everything on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta, like I said, I mean, like the title of our podcast here is, it's all about getting through, and that's you got. How do I say this? If you don't do anything different, if you don't change your life, if you don't take steps, it's all going to stay the same way as it is.
100%.
In fact, I've been told that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And so
I tell people that all the time.
Yeah.
So we got to step forward and walk through and make changes to get to the other side. And when you get there, don't leave everybody else behind. Help somebody else.
And this is what this is all about. This is literally what we're trying to do, because I think that we're trying to make a platform for people to be heard. And like, it takes a strong person like yourself, Danny, to tell your story. Like, that's hard for people in general.
Yeah.
That's huge. So
it's hard to listen.
Well, yeah.
When we first started doing it, we started doing some research. I started doing research on suicides and depression and stuff in America.
Yes.
And I actually had to stop my research and regather myself, because the numbers, when you look at numbers, it's astronomical. And it's enough to make you wonder, like, what is this little podcast going to do for that? I mean, like, but we've always said if we could help that one person, then we've done what we need to be doing, but man, when you look at the numbers, you start thinking to yourself, like, it's a little podcast, you know? I mean, like, who, you know, like, how are we even going to make a dent in these numbers, you know?
Right.
But all we need is that one.
Yeah, and I think we came into it with the right attitude also. If we can just talk to one person and one person's like, hey, I can get through this, that's all I'd give all my time in the world to help that one person. So, you know, that's how we came into it. Yeah, it's great. Logic, do you have any parting questions or anything like that?
Well, I don't have any parting questions, or I do have one thing to say. You know, I've known this man a long time, and you know, it seems like when I was younger, I looked up to him a lot because, you know, when you're a young child, you're going to church, your youth director is the one you kind of look up to. You don't really look up to your pastor of the church. I mean, you see him and you listen to him on Sundays.
Yeah.
But it's the stuff in your Sunday school and the group, you know, like the church camps that we went to, you know, Camp Paisano and stuff, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, those are things that you never forget, you know. So you end up looking up to that man that was, or woman in some cases,
Yeah,
that is your youth pastor, because that's when you really start to understand what's going on. You know, like, or you start grasping, you know, like the concept. You know, when you're a kid,
exactly.
you're going, yeah, you know what's going, you know, like you hear it, but as you start getting older, you actually start to understand it, you know, just a little bit more, and a little bit more.
Right.
And um, when I started, you know, hanging out with Robert and having my run-ins with Robert, I didn't even realize that Robert was his nephew at the time.
That's true. I'm stepping inside because my battery is dying. So
okay.
Well, yeah, that's why we can wrap it up. I just wanted to see if
Yeah, we're just wrapping it up. But you know, when Robert told me that was his uncle, I couldn't believe it. You know, because I mean, this guy was the one that I looked up to growing up. But with all that being said, with Danny, if it wasn't for Danny and those years of my youth, I mean, I don't know if I'd be the same man I am today, even though the things that, you know, that have transpired between the time of me and Danny, our run-ins.
sure.
I mean, but he laid a foundation of what between good and evil, you know, and that was something that nobody else had done. I mean, of course, my parents, but when you're a kid, your parents don't know nothing.
yeah,
Your parents really actually built into my ministry over and over. Your parents were the worker bees that helped out, that participated in the youth group and, you know, stirred the Kool-Aid and showed up and helped with the Sunday school classes and, you know, participated in youth
Right.
camp. I mean, your folks were the volunteers that made my ministry possible. And I remember you when you were little. I mean, when you were still elementary school, you know, being a part of that. So yeah, I mean, it's an honor to be, and I understand the connection that you have with the youth pastor over your senior pastor, because the youth pastor is the one that's there with you.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and that's by design. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And so it's an
Yeah.
honor to be able to give to somebody else. And so yeah, I definitely thank you, Gary, for sharing that
No
with
problem.
me.
Thank you for sharing your story with us in such
Yeah.
a short notice, and it was amazing. And our listeners, I mean, a lot of them have commented, you know, that you know, they love your story, they love your, you know, great testimony. I mean, everybody's, you know, so we appreciate it, Danny, and you know, um, Thank you very much. That's all. That's all I got.
you.
What do you got,
Thank you.
partner?
That's it. I just want to, give my thanks also. I know we're taking time, which you can never get back. So it's appreciated. And, hopefully that,
Thank you.
you just keep pushing on, because it seems like you are, and that's great. So with that being said, do you have any final words, Danny, for anyone, or?
I do have a quick question.
Okay.
Now that I'm aware of what you're doing, I
Mhm.
want to continue to be a part of it.
Sure.
Do y'all send out notifications when you're about to do a podcast and all that?
So we try. So I'm probably the worst one at that.
Yeah.
I have 2 kids, and I work full time, and Gary's always on me, like, what are we doing? And sometimes it doesn't work, but we will do our best to send those notifications out. And I know I got to get better at it. But yes.
Am I on the list?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And usually, if we'll put it out through the Bellwether No page, we'll let them know. And usually, what I'll do is I'll share it to my feed also, so my friends that aren't following Bellwether No, shame on you.
Yeah.
At least we'll know that we're gonna go live.
Yeah, and we can give you a courtesy heads up too. We can message you, whatever. So,
But
well, with that being said, thank you for your time. Thank you for your story.
Thank you.
And reaching out. And I guess we will go from the next one.
yes,
Sounds
sir.
good.
It is awesome.
Thank
so
you.
You guys have a good evening, and we will see you next time.
God bless.